Now, live on Fox Providence. This is Eyewitness News at 6:30. Coverage you can count on.
Welcome to a special presentation from Eyewitness News Weather Week Summer Threats. Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Tony Petrarca.
And I'm Michelle Muscatello. All week long, we've been informing you about the different kinds of weather that can strike this time of year.
But we've been covering really everything from A to Z, tornadoes, hurricanes, hail, weather safety. And our team's been working on this now for, what, the last couple of months?
Yeah, you know, a topic that we try to hit on every month and every year that's important to southern New Englanders are hurricanes.
That's the big question right now, considering we've had a hurricane just recently off the east coast of the United States, Hurricane Chris. So a lot of people are wondering, what's the remainder of the hurricane season going to be like? It was somewhat active so far for the month of July. Had an opportunity to speak with the director of the National Hurricane Center, bringing up that question. Take a look.
Last year's hurricane season was one of the most devastating on record, with 6 storms impacting the U.S. Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria in 2017 produced billions of dollars in damage. Some of New England's most memorable storms occurred during mid to late summer, with names like Carol, Bob, and Hurricane Gloria.
The Fox Point Hurricane Barrier behind me, a reminder of the hurricane history here in southern New England, built to prevent a storm surge from flooding downtown Providence. We're about 6 weeks into hurricane season, and the most active part of the season is coming up during August and September.
So what will this season be like? The current outlook from NOAA for the remainder of the season calls for 10 to 16 named storms, of which 5 to 9 would be hurricanes. The number of major storms is expected to be 1 to 4. Keep in mind, this represents the number of storms at sea and not a landfall prediction. I spoke with Kenneth Graham, the director of the National Hurricane Center. His message is simple.
An important sentence here is this: it only takes one, and we really encourage people, if there's one storm on Earth and it affects your area, then it's a busy season. So preparedness is the same either way.
Sea surface temperatures play a major role in how hurricanes develop. Specifically, where is the water running warmer or cooler than average? This part of the equatorial Pacific, the anomalies here determine whether or not we have a La Nina or an El Nino. But of more interest is in the central Atlantic, where our hurricanes develop. We've noticed that the water temperatures here have been running cooler than average. Storms need warm ocean waters. However, the cooler than normal waters in the tropical Atlantic could play a major factor. Dr. Phil Klotzbach from the University of Colorado is watching this closely.
Now, obviously, even if you have a colder than normal Atlantic, doesn't necessarily mean, even if the hurricane season itself is quiet, it doesn't necessarily mean that you won't have 1 or 2 storms intensify, become hurricanes, and then make landfall, but it would tend to reduce those odds.
All right, that was Dr. Phil Klotzbach. He's actually local. He grew up in southeastern Massachusetts. He told me he grew up watching Channel 12. And his updated forecast came out just last week on July 2nd. And, you know, we're talking about how the Atlantic is running a little cooler than average. Yeah. And based on that, and maybe we may see an El Nino develop later in the summer, he's actually lowered the numbers just a little bit. So as far as the number of storms forming in the Atlantic, because as you know, the theme and what the National Director of the Hurricane Center said, it only takes one.
I mean, the Hurricane Bob season, a good example.
That was quiet.
Second named storm of the season, hitting us in August.
And another example would be, we're talking about Andrew.
Yes.
That was South Florida in 1991. That was a very quiet season and a classic example of how it only takes one. So, you know, we try to better the forecast as best as we can as far as the storm track and the intensity. And we're trying to better how, you know, buildings in our property can withstand you know, storm damage like hail and lightning and strong wind.
Well, we know that hurricanes can do a huge amount of damage. So whether it's those surges, the heavy rain, or the strong winds that can devastate property, and there's actually a lab here in Rhode Island that tries to replicate the power of a storm. The company tries to prevent insurance losses by testing how buildings hold up against severe weather. Eyewitness News meteorologist TJ Del Santo got a look inside.
Here in Northwest Rhode Island is a facility where engineers recreate the forces of nature to make property more resilient. In the woods of western Rhode Island in West Gloucester, there is a very unique facility, FM Global's Natural Hazards Laboratory.
We're focused very strongly on preventing those losses. So we don't want our client to suffer a disaster, but we work with them to keep any event to be a minor distraction instead.
Catherine Klazowski says FM Global is the only property insurance company that has a research campus like this. Here, workers study how natural disasters could impact property, mainly for their corporate clients, but the same principles can be applied to homeowners. This large cannon replicates the force of 110-mile-an-hour winds, which is what a Category 2 hurricane could bring, similar to what Hurricane Bob brought to Rhode Island in 1991.
We know that hurricanes hit Rhode Island, and we've had some in recent years. And when hurricane winds, strong winds come through, we know they're going to pick up debris, whether it's a fallen tree limb or a stop sign that's been blown over, and we know that debris is going to get thrown into buildings. We know that many people put up plywood. What we want to know is a half-inch piece of plywood enough, or does it need to be 3/4 of an inch or 1 inch?
Firing a 2x4 into half-inch plywood reveals poor results as the board goes right through the plywood.
And fire.
A 2x4 launched toward a 1-inch piece of plywood shows the board bouncing off. FM Global engineers found that anything thicker than 3/4-inch plywood is sufficient. Now on to the hail launcher, where they actually make their own hailstones in 3 different steps to make it more realistic, like a real hailstone. They put it into a machine and they'll fire it.
Firing in 3, 2, 1.
At different kinds of building materials.
That has essentially created a hole right in the corner.
What roofing systems are going to be able to withstand that type of hail falling out of the sky? That's the kind of testing that we do. We launch a piece of hail at various roofing materials to see which ones are going to be able to withstand that impact.
Another test studies how window glass breaks when it's pelted by rocks, and if it breaks, will it allow water in?
1.
The first window isn't treated, but the second window is covered with a protective film.
People often underestimate the amount of damage that Mother Nature can cause. We know it's real because we test it.
The Natural Hazards Laboratory also recreates earthquakes, fires, and water damage to see how buildings and different building techniques can withstand those forces of nature. I'm TJ Del Santo, Eyewitness News.
I want that hail machine.
Yeah, right. And note to self, 3/4-inch plywood or thicker. That is good information to know.
Very interesting, because some plywood may be too thin, as you saw in that story, and it's useless. Remember the old days when we put tape on the window?
Yes.
No. So many ways to keep safe, and one of them, of course, is the Pinpoint Weather app, and it's been updated as well. And what's unique is that it will follow you, so you can pick the location that you're in, or you can set a location, and it will automatically warn you when severe weather approaches. So
actually, we hear your voice.
Yeah, late at night, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and the app woke me up with good reason. It was a severe thunderstorm warning, and I heard my voice on the phone. But the new feature is that it will follow you wherever you go via GPS. So you're out on a boat, you're at the Little League field, there's lightning approaching, you'll get a tone on that. So you can download that on the Android device or your Apple devices as well. Of course, severe weather is more than just, maybe ruining your summer vacation plans. It has obviously a big economic impact, whether some businesses are making money or losing money. So it's kind of a catch-22.
And that's what I looked at in our Weather Week coverage. Rhode Island's aquaculture industry. Now, Rhode Island's part of what's known as the Gold Coast. It's an area from Long Island to Maine, and it's those cool ocean waters around here that lead to really hearty, tasty oysters. Well, I spoke to local shellfish farmers who say this past winter was unusually harsh, and now they're trying to prepare for 2 big summer threats: hurricanes and warm ocean temperatures.
It's a busy day at Watch Hill Oysters, where there's a constant cycle of monitoring, sorting, and seeding oysters. It's a small business that alone brings a yield of 500,000 to 1 million oysters per year. Oysters that are sold and known around the country.
I've been growing Watch Hill oysters for
Over 25 years. One of the old timers in the aquaculture business.
It's an industry that's been growing in recent years and becoming a larger part of Rhode Island's economy.
The last 9 years since I've been in this position, we've gone from 33 farms to 73 farms, and the production has gone from less than $1 million worth per year to over 7.
New England's weather is prime for oyster farming, but its extremes can also lead to extreme crop loss.
This was the worst winter I can remember.
In January, an unusual combination of extremely low tides, a cold snap, and persistent west winds drove water out of the salt ponds and exposed the oysters to the air, where they froze.
It was horrible. And it didn't just happen to me.
From a devastating winter to the fears of a hurricane, David Butel of the Coastal Resource Management Council says another storm like Superstorm Sandy that brings significant sedimentation to the coast could be a disaster for aquaculture.
When the next hurricane comes and fills aquaculture leases with sand and buries the equipment, changes the water depth, how do we handle that?
If an oyster gets covered with sand, its edges have to come out of the sand or the mud for it to be able to pump the 50 gallons of water a day that it pumps, or it will suffocate and die.
Even the sunny stretches we love in the summer are not good for aquaculture.
The water temperature will rise, and in these shallow coastal ponds can get to a point where the water's too warm for the oysters to feed, so they will stop growing.
Well, it could take 2 years to recover from this past harsh winter, and that's barring any more extreme weather events.
All right, interesting stuff. There's more summer weather coverage you can count on. Tornadoes in Rhode Island. Well, it's happened before. We'll take a closer look. The last time a twister hit our area.
Plus, bouncing back from Superstorm Sandy, see how one community rebuilt after the storm so they could survive the next one. Plus, we'll be answering some of your questions as well, like this one sent in from viewer Susan on Facebook. Last year, we had a 92-degree day in October. Do you see another long or a short summer? We'll have that answer for you after the break. Welcome back to the special presentation from Eyewitness News Weather Week Summer Threats.
I hope the summer's not too short. I mean, they complained the summer's too short, especially since spring was so cool. Yeah. So one of the weather questions was, can we extend, or can the summer be extended, considering just how hot it was? What was it last time at 92 degrees back in October? When you get a nice warm September and October, boy, it feels so much better.
Yeah, and you know what? The likelihood here is that the hot weather we've been seeing this summer will extend into at least the early autumn. This is a look from the Climate Prediction Center at the likelihood of above average temperatures. And you can see New England certainly highlighted as having a higher probability of warmer than normal temperatures for not only the rest of July, but August and September as well.
We hope that trend holds out.
We're also tracking severe weather. Unfortunately, tornadoes are one severe weather event we don't see a whole lot of here in southern New England.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a tornado history, but you're right, the frequency is very low. But every now and then you can get a memorable tornado. I mean, the Springfield, Massachusetts tornado just several years ago. There was one in Great Barrington back in 1992. So it can happen. And meteorologist Pete Mangione has more on that topic.
Since some of the notable tornadoes in Rhode Island history, technology like the Doppler radar behind me has changed a lot, but the memories of some of those tornadoes are still fresh.
It was July 23rd, 2008, almost 10 years ago.
Control room is ready. We're going to go both stations at the same time. We should go now.
Get prepared.
Get ready by the minute.
Do it.
The EF1 tornado started as a water spout just off Rumstick Point in Barrington. Then it moved into Warren, tearing up trees, damaging homes, and knocking down power lines.
There were trees down pretty much everywhere.
We recently caught up with Dorianne Souza, who is working in Warren about a block away from where the tornado touched down. She didn't even know it had happened until her daughter called.
I looked up Harris Avenue, and there was trees everywhere, branches everywhere. It looked like splinters, toothpicks, all the way up the road. And I said, oh my God, there really was a tornado in Warren.
The August 7th, 1986 Providence tornado was part of an outbreak. 3 tornadoes in less than 24 hours. It started in Cranston, then smashed into downtown Providence. Its path of destruction included the Fulford Manufacturing Building. National Weather Service meteorologist Eleanor Valier Talbot, in her first year on the job, was on her way back from vacation when the storm hit.
They said something about a Providence tornado, and we looked at each other like, oh, really?
The storm database from the National Centers for Environmental Information goes back to 1950, and it only has 11 confirmed Rhode Island tornadoes. Valier Talbot helped us dig through some older reports that include a destructive tornado that passed just south of Providence in 1838 and an 1882 Johnston twister. The book, Historic Storms of New England, also mentions a northwest Rhode Island tornado from the 1700s. While tornadoes can happen in Rhode Island, the Atlantic Ocean and Narragansett Bay do offer some protection.
I think the main reason is the marine influence. That, in other words, the water has a cooling effect, and the air coming over the water into Rhode Island tends to weaken the storms.
Over the years, there have been quite a few instances in which funnel clouds have been seen rotating over the sky of southern New England, but it doesn't officially go into the record book as a tornado unless it makes contact with the ground. I'm meteorologist Pete Mangione, Eyewitness News.
You had some experience with one of them.
Yeah, I was stopped at a stoplight in Warren when that tornado in 2008 went right overhead.
You were lucky.
I was fine, yeah, but it was certainly did some damage to some of the surrounding homes. We got another viewer question. It was a slow start to hurricane season. Do you see an uptick in the future? And that was certainly true about the month of June, but here in July so far, we've had 2 hurricanes.
2, and could most certainly, Chris just recently now racing off the coastline, but you can see here, as far as the climatology, when the season really starts to peak, and that is during August and especially during the early portion of September.
And then as we head into October, our ocean waters start to cool and the likelihood of those storms goes down. There's more coverage you can count on in our Weather Week special. Bouncing back from Superstorm Sandy, we'll take you inside the rebuilding effort in South County and see how they hope to weather the next big storm. Welcome back to this special presentation from Eyewitness News Weather Week Summer Threats. It's been 6 years since Superstorm Sandy hit the East Coast, and southern New England was sideswiped by the wind and waves from that monster storm.
Yeah, if there was a ground zero for our area, definitely the south coast, westerly, and especially the Mesquamaket area. At one point during the storm, the winds were gusting up to 81 miles per hour. And meteorologist TJ Del Santo caught up with a local man who lives there who can experience some of that damage.
Superstorm Sandy hit 6 years ago, and for one westerly family, it wasn't just about cleaning up after the storm, it was about engineering their home to withstand the next storm. It was late October when Superstorm Sandy hit the east coast of the United States. Westerly was sideswiped by the wind and waves, but the damage here was significant.
A lot of flooding and structural damage. There were several buildings that are no longer here now.
Harry Treffis owns Bayview Fun Park in Mesquamaket.
There was over 4 feet on the front side of the miniature golf course, so that took the brunt of the flow from the beach. There was a lot of sand.
He also lives here.
The original cottage has been here since after the '54 hurricane.
Only a couple feet off the ground, it survived numerous storms, including Gloria, Bob, and yes, even Sandy. After Sandy, FEMA's hazard mitigation grant money became available, which paid for 75% of the cost to raise homes out of the floodplain.
We raised it 14 feet, and it's 3 feet out of the floodplain now.
The living space is 16 feet off the ground. Below that, only storage and cars are allowed.
It's designed to allow the water to flow underneath rather than taking any kind of direct hit.
Small windows and hurricane brackets help the building handle hurricane force winds. Utilities have been elevated above the floodplain.
Our business is an outside business, so we had to do a lot of cleanup in the way of sand removal. We did have some structure damage. We did have to replace some equipment.
An in-ground pool used to house the bumper boats. Now they bounce around in an above-ground pool, which can be taken down fairly quickly. The building, with Sandy's water line still visible, is now anchored into concrete. The cottage raising project took 3 years, but Treffis feels confident he's now ready for the next one.
I'm sure there'll be repairs, but at least now it won't be as severe as it was in the past as a result of what we learned through Sandy.
The worst of Sandy hit a relatively small portion of Rhode Island. I asked Harry, based on his experience, if he had any advice for others, and he said, be proactive, prepare now. In Westerly, I'm TJ Del Santo, Eyewitness News.
Good advice, proactive, not reactive. And you saw in that story how that house, the foundation, is elevated 14 feet above the beach. And you would think, well, that's rather high, but you know, the wall of water that comes in with a hurricane, of course, called the storm surge. And we get that question all the time. What is the storm surge? How dangerous is it? What can it do? And it's like a liquid bulldozer. It can just knock things down.
And so it's kind of a tricky thing to calculate because there are several factors that influence how bad the storm surge is. And that's part of the weather question here that Jill asked from Cranston. She said, how is the storm surge predicted? It feels like I hear a lot more about it lately with so many big storms. So we factor in with the storm surge that forward force of the water by the winds of the storm. So here's what impacts the storm surge for you. We take a look at the conditions. It has to do with the storm's intensity and size, the forward speed of the storm, the angle of the approach of the storm to the coastline, and then coastal features like bays and estuaries. And we know that Narragansett Bay and Buzzards Bay especially are vulnerable to storm surge. Yeah, geography is huge. How Narragansett Bay starts off wide and then it gets very narrow at the Providence River. And also whether or not, like during Hurricane Carol in the 1938 hurricane, whether or not the storm strikes at high or low tide. Yes, exactly. And we got another question. This is, how is the dew point calculated? What's its relation to the temperature and humidity? And Mike asked that one. Well, dew point is a term that we use a lot in the summertime. Talks about the moisture content in the atmosphere, how comfortable the air is. This is a few days here this week of what the dew points were. But people, it's hard to explain to people in like a 2-minute and 30-second weathercast what that means.
Get the question all the time, especially from school kids. What is the dew point? And there you go.
All right, so if the temperature and the dew point were the same, the relative humidity is at 100%. So if it's 30 degrees and a 30-degree dew point, that's 100% relative humidity. Doesn't really give us a good indication of the comfort level, because when the dew point is, say, 75 on a 90-degree day, the relative humidity is only 65%, but the comfort level, well, it feels really oppressive.
There's going to be a dew point quiz after this presentation, so I hope you're paying attention.
Thanks for joining us.